Aloha and welcome to the lesson. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about more while examples. So let's go ahead and pull up our VS Code IDE. And here we are. So one of the examples that they had in the book was Euclid's algorithm to finding the greatest common divisor, and it's quite interesting. So the algorithm for doing this is if you've got two numbers, you look at them, you say, is A greater than B? And if it is, then you're going to say A equals A minus B. But if A is less than B, you're going to say B equals B minus A. And then you're going to repeat this whole process until A is equal to B. And there's one assumption that comes with this, and that is that both of these numbers are positive integers. We're not going to test for that. We're just going to trust that that's the way it is. So let's take a look here. So we'll start with, let's say I want the number 125 as our two numbers. So when we code this out in actual Python, we're going to say while A is not equal to B, in other words, until it's actually equal, we're going to loop through this process. We're going to say if A is greater than B, then we're going to, I'm going to print that out. I'm going to say that, hey, A is greater than B. So we subtract B from A to give us blah, blah, blah. So then we say A minus equals B. And then the else for that is, as we stated before, the B is going to be minus equal to A. So then we're going to repeat the process. We're going to go back up there after we've changed either A or B, and we're going to say, hey, is A, not equal to B? And if it is, then we're going to go and we're going to keep on doing this. So it goes through until we get to the greatest common divisor. So we're going to start with 100 for A, and B is going to be 25. So let's go ahead and hit the play button. And we have it saying in the beginning, 100 is greater than 25. So you subtract 25 from 100 to get 75. So then at that point, we've got 75. Is 75 greater than 25? Yes. So we subtract 25 from 75 to get 50. Then we go through it again. We say 50 is greater than 25. So we subtract 25 from 50 to get 25. So now we've got A is 25 and B is 25. So we exit out of here because that no longer the A greater than, or the A not equal to B no longer is true. So we go out here, we say A is what, B is what, and that's the end of it. So that is Euclid's algorithm for finding the greatest common divisor. And we just implement it using the while statement. So that's a nice way of using this. So now we have a conversation example. I actually didn't like the conversation example, so I changed things around. So what we're going to do here is we're going to repeat a loop until the user enters the text goodbye. So in the lesson, we learned two different things. One is, what is a docstring? Well, a docstring allows you to leave comments. Instead of doing what I do in each one of these lines, which is put a pound sign in front of it, you can actually have a whole block that's treated as text. And to do that, you either use 3 single quotes or 3 double quotes. Then you put in all your text, and then you go and you put in a closing 3 single or double quotes, and that will close off it. So everything in between is treated as, a comment essentially. So in our little example that we've got here, let me go ahead and uncomment this. So I didn't like their example. Their example was really just an annoying little conversation tool that would have you try to talk to it, and it would randomly tell you, depending on a dice roll, it would say something like, oh, tell me more about what you just said, or something like that. And I find that annoying, so I didn't want to repeat that. So I'm doing something instead. What I'm going to do is a guessing game for numbers. So I start out by importing the random module, and then I say that our start number is going to be 0 and our end number is going to be 10. And then I say, okay, my number is going to be a randomly selected integer between that start number of 0 and the end number of 10. So I go ahead and I type in random.randint, and I give it those two parameters. and that's going to generate my number. So then I print my number out, and then I test. I say, well, is my number not equal to, and this is the interesting part, I'm making it not equal to this right here, which I'm doing an input, letting the user input the information. So I'm going to be asking the user, I am thinking of a number between, and I have the start and the end number. I tell them to guess. So it'll take this value and it'll have a number, and it'll convert it to an integer because we're trying to compare it to an integer. So I'm saying here is, or while my number is not equal to the number that they pick, I'm going to print the phrase wrong answer. And then when they finally get the right answer, then I'll have it say, you guessed it. So if we want to see what this looks like in real life, we hit the play button, and it tells us I am thinking of a number between 0 and 10. Yes, and I kind of have a cheat here. I have it telling me it's 0. So if I was to say 5 or 6 and I hit enter, it'd say wrong answer. If I said 3, it'd say wrong answer. But if I tell it 0, because I know it's 0, it's going to say you guessed it. So it goes in here, it does this while, evaluates it, and then it, if it's not equal, it's going to do a wrong answer. Otherwise, it's going to, break out, and it's going to go to the very next line, which is you guessed it. So that's how we use that. So now I'm going to go here. I'm going to comment this code out. We're going to go down here. We're going to talk about sentinel value. So you can use a sentinel value to loop over an arbitrary number of inputs. Sometimes you don't know how many inputs you're going to have, so it's nice to have, just a sentinel. So you can, if you're using a sentinel value, you'd use something that's not going to be a normally inputted number. Like if you're dealing with positive numbers, you can have them put in like a 0 or maybe a negative number to kick it out. You can have that as your sentinel. But anyways, we're going to do an example here using average, or to find average. So we're going to comment that out. Like always, we set up our initializers. So we're going to say that our sum is 0. The number of values at this point is 0. And then we say value equals, and we say, hey, give me a value to add to the sum that's going to be averaged. So we're going to use the input here. We're going to take that, and it's going to return it as text. Then we're going to convert that to an integer. We're going to store that in value. And then we start a loop. We're saying, while that integer is not equal to 0, we're going to do a sum plus equals value. In other words, whatever number that they just gave us to be averaged, we're going to add that into the sum, and then we're going to increase the number of values that we've taken in by 1. So down here, I have it say, or I have it go ahead and do the input again so we can put it in. We can input the next number. Then we go back up here and say, is that value not equal to 0? And in other words, are we, as long as we're not ready to cut off the inputs here, and putting a 0 in is really to cut off your inputs. While it's not that way, we're going to repeat this code. So we keep on going through this. Then after we finish all of that, we've got everything finished, we know what our sum of all those values is. And we also know the number of values that we had. So then we can come down here and we can say, hey, the average is sum divided the number of values. So let's go ahead and run this and see how it looks. So you hit play. It says value to sum. I'm going to say 9. Then value of the sum, I'm going to say 6. Then I'll say it's 3, and then I'll say it's 0. So that should kick us out. So if we were to take our values there and divide by 6 and round it, or take those 3 values added together, divide it by the 3, and then round it, we're going to have 6. So that is essentially how this works. So we can do these loops, and we can use a sentinel value to exit out when we're asking for an arbitrary number of inputs. So that's the end of this lesson. I hope that's kind of cleared up a little bit for you, and hopefully we're getting some practice using the phrase sentinel value, just to understand that that's the value that we need to actually kick ourselves out of that looping routine. So hopefully as we go through these examples and you see things, and you'll see how while is used, you'll see how we use our logic there, then you can see that we have these indented loop bodies that we go through over and over. And we go back up and we look at our sentinel value again. But, of course, you're going to want to be modifying that value that's being evaluated for, to eventually make this true. So you can kick out and go to the next line. So anyway, that's all for this lesson. I will see you in the next lesson.